On July 16, 1946, at the former Dachau concentration camp in Germany, a U.S. military tribunal announced its verdicts against 73 former Waffen-SS officers and soldiers. Between mid-December 1944 and mid-January 1945, they had carried out a series of atrocities later known as the Malmedy Massacre, deliberately murdering, torturing, and shooting around 350 unarmed American prisoners of war and nearly 100 Belgian civilians. At the center of these crimes stood German SS officer Joachim Peiper. Peiper, the third son of Waldemar Peiper, an officer in the Imperial German Army, was born on January 30, 1915, in Wilmersdorf, then part of the German Empire. His father had served in Kaiser Wilhelm II's army during the First World War, which broke out on July 28, 1914. Like many veterans, Waldemar felt betrayed and embittered after Germany's defeat and the signing of the armistice on November 11, 1918, in the Compiègne forest of France. In the aftermath of the war, Germany was gripped by political and social upheaval. The 1919 Treaty of Versailles imposed severe terms on the defeated nation, the monarchy collapsed, and the new Weimar Republic emerged. Radical right-wing groups, racist and anti-Semitic in nature, spread false claims that Jews and communists were to blame for Germany's misfortunes. Among these groups was the Nazi Party. When Adolf Hitler and the Nazis came to power in January 1933, they made the stab-in-the-back myth central to their ideology. This conspiracy theory claimed that Germany's army had not been defeated in battle, but had been betrayed at home by Jews and revolutionary socialists. The Nazis branded those who signed the 1918 armistice as the November criminals, insisting they had stabbed the nation in the back. Historians, however, have consistently rejected this myth, pointing out that by late 1918 the Imperial Army was exhausted, overwhelmed by U.S. entry into the war, and already militarily defeated. The myth nevertheless resonated with nationalists like Waldemar Peiper and deeply influenced his sons. Joachim and his brother Horst embraced the path of militant nationalism and military service. Horst fought in the Battle of France in 1940, but died in Poland in June 1941 under mysterious circumstances, possibly driven to suicide by his fellow SS men over suspicions of homosexuality. Their eldest brother, Hans, suffered from mental illness. After a failed suicide attempt left him brain damaged, he spent his remaining years in a vegetative state and died of tuberculosis in 1942. On January 30, 1933, the day Hitler became Chancellor of Germany and Peiper turned 18, Joachim joined the Hitler Youth, the Nazi paramilitary youth movement. Structured like the army, the organization trained boys in military drills, weapon handling, farming, competitive sports, and physical endurance, all while indoctrinating them to sacrifice for the fatherland. While some youths enjoyed the challenge and camaraderie, others struggled with the relentless focus on war and self-sacrifice. By October 1933, Peiper had entered the SS. Ambitious and egocentric, he quickly attracted the attention of Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS, during the 1934 Nuremberg rally. To Himmler, Peiper embodied the Nazi ideal of the Aryan master race, even if he lacked the stereotypical Nordic features. His confidence, charm, and ambition made him stand out. From April 1935 to March 1936, Peiper trained at an SS Junker school, institutions created to mold future SS officers. In March 1938, he officially joined the Nazi Party, and by June of that year he was appointed adjutant to Himmler himself. Favored by the Reichsführer SS, Peiper quickly rose, accompanying Himmler to official functions and, by 1939, serving as his adjutant at nearly every major event. When Germany invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, Peiper traveled in Himmler's personal train and sometimes acted as a liaison officer to Hitler during meetings with generals near the front. On September 20th, in the Polish city of Bydgoszcz, Peiper and Himmler watched as 20 Polish social leaders were executed publicly to suppress potential resistance. Later, on December 13, 1939, in the village of Owinska near Poznan, they observed the implementation of the Nazi T for euthanasia program, the gassing of mentally ill patients in psychiatric hospitals. In post-war interrogations by the U.S. Army, Peiper recounted these killings with chilling detachment. Describing one gassing, he said, The action was carried out before a circle of invited guests. The insane were led into a specially prepared casemate with a plexiglass window. Once the door was shut, one could see them laughing and talking at first. But soon, under the influence of the gas, they sat down on the straw. Very soon, they no longer moved. In May 1940, Heinrich Himmler and Joachim Peiper accompanied the Waffen-SS during the Battle of France. On May 18th, Peiper was promoted to platoon leader in the 1st SS Panzer Division's motorized regiment. For his boldness in combat, he received the Iron Cross 2nd Class, and just 1 month later, the Iron Cross 1st Class. As an additional reward, he brought home a French sports car for personal use. In June 1940, Peiper returned to his position as Himmler's personal adjutant. In September of that year, Himmler addressed the commanders of the 1st SS Panzer Division's motorized regiment, stating, "We had to have the toughness, this should be said and soon forgotten, to shoot thousands of leading Poles." He also acknowledged the psychological toll such acts took on his men, mentioning the emotional strain of carrying out executions, hauling people away, and evicting crying and hysterical women to clear Polish territories for German colonization. In February 1941, Himmler informed Peiper of the upcoming Operation Barbarossa, the planned invasion, conquest, and German colonization of the Soviet Union. Between June 11th and 15th, 1941, Peiper attended an SS conference where Himmler outlined plans to exterminate up to 30 million Slavs across Eastern Europe, particularly in Russia. That summer, Peiper's tenure as Himmler's adjutant came to an end. In October 1941, he was reassigned to the 1st SS Panzer Division's motorized regiment and sent to the Eastern Front, near the Black Sea. There, he earned a reputation for aggressive leadership and a fierce fighting spirit. But his victories often came at the cost of heavy losses in tanks and men. During the Third Battle of Kharkov, February 19th to March 15th, 1943, Peiper's unit gained notoriety for a daring rescue of the encircled 320th Infantry Division. In a letter home, Peiper described brutal hand-to-hand combat with a Soviet ski battalion to extract the trapped division, including its sick and wounded. The operation ended with a fierce clash at the village of Krasnaya Polyana, where Peiper's troops discovered that their small rearguard medical detachment had been killed and mutilated. In retaliation, Peiper ordered the village burned to the ground and its inhabitants executed. Peiper's violent reputation spread quickly. His men earned the nickname the Blowtorch Battalion, after they torched and massacred 2 Soviet villages in February 1943 as revenge for the wounding of 2 SS officers. In those reprisals, 872 civilians, including 240 burned alive inside a church, were killed. In March 1943, for his heroism and unorthodox leadership, Peiper received the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, the Third Reich's highest military award. After the Battle of Kursk in July 1943, when the Red Army seized the initiative on the Eastern Front, Peiper's unit was withdrawn from Russia and redeployed to northern fascist Italy. Following Italy's surrender to the Allies in September 1943, German forces swiftly occupied northern and central Italy to prevent an Allied foothold. They established the Italian Social Republic, a puppet state under Benito Mussolini, whom German commandos had just freed from captivity. The occupation was brutal, marked by executions, mass arrests, and fierce clashes with Italian partisans. On September 19, 1943, near the town of Boves in northwest Italy, partisan fighters ambushed German troops, killing 1 and capturing 2. Peiper and his men were sent to retaliate. They surrounded the town, cutting off access and threatening to destroy it unless the captured soldiers were released. Local priest Giuseppe Bernardi and businessman Antonio Vassallo negotiated their release and the return of the dead soldier's body. Despite his promise to spare the town, Peiper ordered his men to open fire. Bernardi and Vassallo were drenched in gasoline and burned alive. Most of the victims were elderly or infirm civilians who had been unable to flee. The SS showed no mercy. 1 deaf-mute man was shot while trying to extinguish flames in his burning home. A disabled veteran was killed while fleeing through a field, and an 87-year-old bedridden woman was burned alive in her house. The deputy priest, Don Mario Gabato, was shot dead while giving last rites to a dying villager. In total, 23 civilians were murdered and 350 houses destroyed in retaliation for the local resistance. In November 1943, Peiper returned to the Eastern Front. Despite lacking experience in tank warfare, he replaced the fallen commander of the 1st SS Panzer Regiment and assumed full command. His overly aggressive tactics, however, often ignored sound military judgment, leading to unnecessary Waffen-SS casualties and massive tank losses. After just 1 month under his leadership, the regiment had only 12 operational tanks left. By December 1943, Peiper was relieved of his combat duties for reckless command decisions and reassigned to divisional headquarters as a staff officer. In March 1944, the 1st SS Panzer Division was withdrawn from the Eastern Front. 3 months later, it was redeployed to the coast of the English Channel to prepare for the expected Allied invasion of Western Europe. On June 6, 1944, under the codename Operation Overlord, American, British, and Canadian forces crossed the English Channel and stormed the beaches of Normandy, France. This historic operation, known as D-Day, marked the largest amphibious invasion in history, involving over 160,000 Allied troops supported by 50,000 vehicles, nearly 5,000 naval vessels, and more than 11,500 aircraft. The Normandy landings became one of the decisive turning points of the Second World War. Peiper's unit remained on the defensive front until late July 1944, when the U.S. Army obliterated nearly every tank of the 1st SS Panzer Division and wiped out a quarter of its 20,000 men. Following a severe nervous breakdown, Joachim Peiper was relieved of his command in August 1944 and spent the following months in a military hospital recovering from the collapse. On December 16, 1944, Germany launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, better known as the Battle of the Bulge, the final large-scale German offensive on the Western Front. Adolf Hitler hoped this surprise counterattack would encircle and destroy the British and American armies, halting the Allied advance into Germany. Initially, German forces achieved some success in the Ardennes region of Belgium, but the offensive quickly stalled. Despite sustaining devastating losses, the U.S. Army managed to delay the German advance long enough for reinforcements to arrive and turn the tide of battle. On December 17, 1944, Joachim Peiper's 1st SS Panzer Division was advancing westward from Boulingen, Belgium, as part of the broader German movement during the Ardennes offensive. Around the same time, a U.S. convoy of 30 vehicles carrying approximately 140 men from the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion was traveling south from the Hurtgen Forest toward Lignaville. Near the hamlet of Bognes, about 4 kilometers south of Malmedy, the two forces crossed paths just before noon. Without warning, Peiper's SS troops opened fire on the Americans. Those who didn't manage to escape, including medical personnel, surrendered quickly. The captured soldiers were stripped of their personal belongings and lined up in 8 rows in a nearby field. According to survivors, around 120 American prisoners of war stood unarmed when SS troops mowed them down with machine guns. Some of the men attempted to flee but were cut down in the open field. Others dropped to the ground, pretending to be dead, but the SS soldiers walked among the bodies, finishing off the wounded with gunshots to the head. Several U.S. soldiers managed to escape to a nearby cafe at the crossroads, but SS troops soon set the building on fire, killing every American who tried to flee the flames. When the Germans finally left the site, at least 84 American soldiers were dead. Roughly 40 men survived the atrocity, later known as the Malmedy Massacre, by fleeing into the surrounding woods or feigning death. In the days that followed, December 17th through 20th, other murders of prisoners of war and civilians were reported. Peiper's SS group was ultimately held responsible for the deaths of about 350 unarmed American soldiers and around 100 Belgian civilians. On May 1, 1945, while stationed in Austria, Peiper's men received news that their Führer, Adolf Hitler, had died the previous day. A week later, on May 8th, the German High Command ordered all remaining units of the 1st SS Panzer Division to surrender to U.S. forces. Peiper was captured on May 22, 1945, and later subjected to interrogation. During questioning in July 1945, Peiper openly professed his loyalty to Nazism. When asked about the suffering of Poles and Jews, he coldly replied, "All Jews are bad, and all Poles are bad. We have just cleansed our society and moved these people into camps, and you let them loose." He further complained that the U.S. government was mistaken in refusing to integrate former Waffen-SS members into the American military to defend Western civilization against the Soviets. On May 16, 1946, the trial of the SS officers involved in the Malmedy Massacre and other killings during the Battle of the Bulge began. All defendants, including Joachim Peiper, were charged with violations of the laws and customs of war, accused of deliberately participating in the murder, shooting, and torture of U.S. soldiers and unarmed civilians. 2 months later, on July 16, 1946, the American military court in Dachau sentenced 46 members of the Waffen-SS, including Joachim Peiper, to death by hanging. Another 23 were given life sentences, while the remaining men received prison terms ranging from 10 to 20 years. However, the convicted SS men claimed that American interrogators had used illegal methods, including torture, and that all statements had been coerced. Reports even alleged that, in 139 cases investigated by the Americans, all but 2 of the German prisoners had been kicked in the genitals beyond repair. A special commission was formed to investigate these accusations, and several of its members questioned the legitimacy of the entire trial. In 1948, the judicial reviewers of the military tribunal commuted some of the death sentences from the Malmedy Massacre trial to life imprisonment. In 1951, Peiper's own death sentence was reduced to life, and 3 years later, it was further shortened to 35 years. Eventually, he was released on parole on December 22, 1956. When 2 U.S. soldiers informed him of his release, Peiper was so stunned that he simply stared at them in silence. After leaving prison, Peiper found work at the Porsche Automobile Company, but Italian trade union workers filed formal complaints, refusing to work with him because of his Nazi past and his command's role in the Boves massacre. Ferdinand Porsche himself intervened to promote Peiper into a management position, but the unions again refused to cooperate. Despite Porsche's personal support, the company ultimately dismissed Peiper, as keeping a convicted Nazi war criminal on staff was damaging U.S. sales. In 1972, Joachim and his wife Sigurd moved to Treves in eastern France, where he owned a small house. There, he worked as a freelance translator of military history books from English to German. Living under his real name, Peiper soon attracted the attention of anti-fascist activists. In June 1976, local political groups distributed flyers throughout Treves, exposing Peiper's Nazi background. Once his identity was confirmed, journalists sought him out, and Peiper willingly gave interviews, claiming he was the victim of communist persecution because of his wartime service. He stated that he had already paid for his crimes with 12 years in prison and even arrogantly declared, "In 1940, the French weren't brave. That's why I'm here." These offensive remarks outraged both the press and the local community. 1 month later, Peiper would face his final reckoning. On July 14, 1976, a group of French anti-Nazis calling themselves the Avengers attacked his home and set it ablaze. Joachim Peiper, then 61 years old, was burned alive. The fire was so intense that his body shrank to about 60 centimeters in length, barely recognizable as human. When his neighbors saw what remained, he reportedly said, "It's him, but he's been miniaturized."